Resource Watch is brought to you in association with Tebe Investment Corporation.
To frack or not to frack? Today we are taking a stab at this crucial debate raging in South Africa in this Resource Watch special. Hello and welcome. I am Nozi Pombandro. Natural gas reserves in the ecologically sensitive Karoo region are said to be a game changer for power scarcity in South Africa. It could remove the country's dependence on coal for electricity generation and bring in much needed economic benefits, especially job creation. But there's also massive opposition to the mining method, with major concerns around water contamination in the farming region.
For millions of years, the Karoo has remained an untouched paradise. It's one of South Africa's iconic locations. Beneath this vast, untouched wilderness lies an estimated $100 billion of energy that could be the answer to Africa's problems. But to get to it, gas companies need to use a mining method called hydraulic fracturing or fracking. It's the same method that has saved the United States economy from recession and made it one of the largest producers of natural gas in the world. It could be used in South Africa, where it's believed there lies an estimated 30 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, enough to power the country's economy for up to 30 years. It could also bring thousands of jobs. But it could also change this idyllic landscape forever.
If something does go wrong, it's finished. You cannot, and I emphasize, cannot rectify the water contamination. Once it's been contaminated, it's over.
If communities get sick from air pollution and water pollution potentially, and pollution of their foodstuffs, like is being recorded now in the United States, who's going to pay for it?
It's been a long time that they are not working. They are still looking for jobs. So the fracking is going to help the people to get jobs.
This is our last gasp,
What is fracking? First, a shaft is drilled thousands of meters into the earth. From there, the shaft is drilled horizontally through a layer of gas-bearing rock. Imagine this rock has thousands of pockets, and then imagine you have to drill thousands of times to release the gas. The frack occurs when water, sand and a mixture of chemicals are forced through the shaft at a very high pressure. The liquid penetrates into the rock and creates fissures that release the gas. A well can use up to 20 million liters of water. Gas can be collected when the fluid is pumped out again. There can be up to 32 wells per drilling pad. But little is known if the waste can reach the Karoo's underground aquifers, which sit at about 200 meters below the surface. Farmers believe drilling, if not regulated and sustained properly, will lead to contamination of borehole water.
South Africa is pressing ahead with its shale gas plans for the ecologically sensitive Karoo region, with the announcement that it would process Challenger Energy's exploration license application. Challenger, an Australian company, is focused on shale gas through its local subsidiary Bundu Gas and Oil Exploration. We're now joined by their managing director, Robert Wild. Robert, thank you for making the time to join us. Now, we've heard that insert, and one of the first voices speaking there saying, if something goes wrong, we might never come back from this. Given the intensity of the opposition that we've seen to fracking, why is this still a good investment case?
Well, I think the first thing to realize is that pretty much everywhere in the world where this method is proposed, except perhaps for some parts of the US where they've really seen the benefit of this, we see these sorts of concerns raised. And there's a very robust debate both for and against, and I think that's a healthy thing. I think there's a certain amount of scaremongering and misinformation around. In fact, the fracking is very deep. It's probably 2-3 kilometers underground, so way below the aquifers and the water tables that we're talking about. The issue really, I think, is less the actual fracking at depth. It's more about the integrity of the wellbore that passes through those aquifers. And that is very, very well established technology, as indeed is the fracking these days as well.
Could we then take that as an assurance that the actual process of fracking is likely to have very limited environmental impact to allay the fears of many of those voices in opposition?
Well, we certainly believe so, and there will be an opportunity to have some further stakeholder engagement and consultation. As you say, the government has now announced that it's going to process the shale gas applications, and we will go through further rounds of consultation as part of that. And that's an opportunity both for ourselves to engage with the community and for the community to raise their concerns, and we really want to listen to them and try and make sure that they fully understand what's involved and try and allay those concerns as much as we can.
Robert, it's been 4 years since you applied for the license, which is now on the verge of being granted. What's the experience, the regulatory experience of dealing with the South African public service, particularly in the mining and energy space, as one of the international investors?
Well, I think it's really been a question of time rather than anything else, and I think it's quite understandable. South Africa declared a moratorium on hydraulic fracturing in 2011. It took until 2012 to go through that process. It established, basically, the government decided it was okay to lift that moratorium. At that point, they decided it was appropriate to have a set of technical regulations, which I think is entirely appropriate. It's a new industry for South Africa. And understandably, it's taken time for those regulations to be pulled together. The various departments travelled to the US and other places to benefit from international experience, and they produced the first draft of the technical regulations. I think it was about October or November last year. So there's been consultation on that. We've partaken of that, as have many other parties, and we're now waiting for those to be finalised.
Are you happy with the regulation that is currently on the table?
Actually, we thought that the regulations had done a fairly good job. I mean, we certainly had some comments, and there are areas that we think possibly need some attention. But by and large, we thought they were a pretty good set of regulations, actually.
And of course, the regulatory environment is always shifting. It's very dynamic. As it evolves, what would be make or break points for you to make sure that if there is a deviation from the drafts that are on the table, that at least those sticky points remain?
I'm not sure that there's a make or break as such in the technical regulations. I think that will sort itself out, and I think that will be fine. People have asked us about the legislation, which is perhaps more of the fiscal terms, and I think that's been a bit of an interesting journey as well. There were some proposed amendments to the MPRDA, the Mineral Petroleum Resources Development Bill, last year that I think took the industry a little bit by surprise. There was a good deal of lobbying, I think, as a result of that. But we're very heartened to see that the amendments that were put through Parliament before the election have not been signed off, and that the new minister has basically taken the time to consider this and has clearly been listening a lot more, taking the time to understand what may be important to get the nascent oil and gas industry going in South Africa. And here we're not just talking about the onshore shale gas, we're talking about the offshore as well. So this is the whole of the oil and gas industry for South Africa.
Certainly seems as if it's getting the regulatory attention that it deserves. But maybe let's go to a sexy term that I often hear, game changer. We use this, we hear the policymakers talking about, and we say that gas is going to be a game changer for the South African economy. What does it mean for the ordinary consumer of energy, the household and the business that is looking on at this with interest?
Well, I suppose if we look at this from a high level to begin with, and it's probably oft quoted, but there's a study that was put together by Econometrics in 2012, and they looked at two different scenarios of shale gas development. One was a 20 TCF development, the other was a 50 TCF development. Now, the amount of gas that the US Energy Information Administration is talking about potentially being recoverable, technically recoverable, is nearly 400 TCF. So these are, small percentages of that, and I wouldn't expect that 400 TCF is economically recoverable. But nevertheless, a 50 TCF development, they modelled this in the South African economy, and they estimated this would add something like 200 billion rand per annum to GDP and create something like 700,000 sustainable jobs. Now, that's not all in the upstream.
Right.
That's the flow-down effect of basically all the supplies, the service industries, and then the flow down effect into the broader economy of having energy available and basically sparking industry. So I think that is, they could be out by, a significant amount, and this would still be hugely significant to the country. If we look at what's happening from a power point of view in South Africa, the crisis that Eskom is in at the moment, South Africa very strongly needs to get that resolved, and having a decent resource of reasonably priced gas could be enormously advantageous from that point of view.
I want to take on that point that you say, and maybe just get into a little bit about the politics of the pocket, if I may call it that.
Yes.
Reasonably priced. Does this mean that when Shell gas comes on board, that tariffs essentially for energy users might come down, or is Shell more expensive than the energy we're currently consuming?
Well, let's look at it this way. I suppose the first thing to say is that we have to carry out the exploration and appraisal in order to establish the size of the resource and what it might cost to develop it. So that is to some extent an unknown at this stage. But on the other hand, there are some very encouraging early signs. The reason that Challenger, or Bundu rather, picked the application area that it did was because there was a well drilled there in the late 60s that actually flowed gas to surface without the need to hydraulically fracture it. So that's a very encouraging sign. So it's likely the gas is there. We have to demonstrate how much is economic to produce. But coming back from that for a moment, there is analysis that's been put together by some of the banks, for example, that would suggest that if you look at the cost of energy or the cost of fuel, if you like, to supply energy, you would probably find that shale gas or domestic gas would be at the lower part of the supply cost curve. So it can be at coal parity or less quite easily.
So there is a potential easing on the pocket for energy consumers in South Africa. Let's talk about Bundu for a minute or so. How important, strategically important was it for you to partner with a local player? And do you think that's really given you first mover advantage now as you begin to penetrate with exploration?
Well, I think firstly we clearly did have the first mover advantage by being the first to go in and peg that block, and then some large, well-known companies have come in around us, which I think validates the acreage that we chose in the first place. We have a very good local partner, Don Nkube, and he's a valued part of the board of Bundu. He's a valued part of the team in terms of driving this forward. And going forward, the regulation and legislation still has to settle in terms of the percentage of local partnership that will ultimately be required in the oil and gas industry. But there is the potential to increase that from where we stand today.
Robert, thank you so much for making the time to join us. Of course, that was Robert Wiles, the Managing Director of Challenger Energy. And that does bring us to the end of this week's show. Do stay in touch. That's by talking to me at Nozipumbandwe and using the hashtag ResourceWatch on Twitter. Until next time, it's goodbye for now.